My name is Valerie, and I'm 58 years old. I've been abused since I was a child. I was abused by my father sexually, and I knew it was wrong, and I hated it. But he was my father, and I was small, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't feel like I could tell anybody. I was abused by my mother physically. Adopted was always thrown around. Everything was my fault because I was adopted. Finally, when I was 16, we were up snowmobiling in New Hampshire, and she decided at that point to tell me the real story of my adoption, and that was that my mother just didn't want me. That was the true story, but it was very hurtful for me at 16 years old to be up somewhere in a happy place snowmobiling and have my mother get drunk and tell me no one wanted you. I worked and put myself through hairdressing school, and I was engaged to a man who was just so good to me. Things were great, and then 2 months before the wedding, I canceled. I just can't think of any reason why I did that, except for the fact that it just wasn't chaotic enough for me. Things were just too good for me. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to relate to, but when you've lived a whole life of chaos and that's all you're familiar with, it's all you know. And then it's taken away from you, and it's nice to not have that chaos, but somehow you feel like something's missing. And then when I found it again, I could relate to it. And then I moved on into an abusive relationship with my ex-husband. He showed me what I thought was affection, of being hit, of being verbally abused. That was what I equated with love. It started just with physical abuse, and then there was verbal abuse. And then the abuse came in the form of just stealing money, stealing our mortgage payments, stealing checks from the middle of checkbooks so I didn't know that they were missing. I would always fight back. So it would end up with him smashing my head through a wall, or smacking me in the face, or throwing me, through a door. And then I would hang on to his leg and beg him not to go, and then he'd just leave. But before he left, he would always come over and say, "I'm sorry." And as he was saying that, his hand would be in my pocketbook, taking a checkbook or any money that was in there, anything he could take. And I don't know how I didn't see it, but it happened every time. And then he'd say, "I'm just going to run out and go down the street and grab some food for us," and then he would be gone for days. And then come back, and it would start all over again. But I would always take him back because I thought I could love him and fix him. I thought giving him more children was going to fix that as well, but that just brought more problems. And then it came to the point where he was holding knives to my throat and grabbing my oldest daughter to come and watch, and he was going to make her watch while he sliced my throat. When my son was about 5, he was leaving with my money, and I knew he took the money I had, and I ran out into the road, and he ran me over with a truck and left me in the middle of the road, and my son at 5 dragged me out of the middle of the road and off to the side of the road until I could get up to my feet. The police had been at my house on numerous occasions and taken him away. He was arrested for the abuse many times. There were stacks of protective orders. He was also a drug addict, and he would come dirty and drugged and alcohol and not bathe. And he would just come in and demand sex from me, and I wanted nothing to do with him, and then he'd just rape me. And my children would be outside the door crying. Then I got pregnant with my twins, and they were 2 years apart from my third daughter. That was a total accident. And he convinced me that that would be a sin if I didn't continue this pregnancy. So I had the twins, kind of even being convinced that I would not be able to do this. And I knew I was doing it alone because I knew he wasn't going to be present. My pastor told me, listen, you can't leave your husband. That's not godly unless you actually catch him doing something. So regardless of the fact that there were prostitutes coming to my door looking for their money, and I was aware that I could possibly contract a disease, my pastor told me that unless I saw it happen, I had to fulfill my wifely obligations. And I went by the word of the leader of the church, and I stayed with him. What really made me get out was one day he got violently ill and he ended up in the hospital. And then I got a call from a doctor, and the doctor told me, you and your children need to get to the hospital immediately and get yourselves inoculated because your husband has hepatitis B. It is a death sentence. He has 2 to 20 years to live, and it is contagious. And that for me was the end. That was when I was willing to say, okay, here's your divorce. I just want out. I went to court. The only thing I wanted was my children. And that fight went on for years. My children were taken from me and given to my ex-husband. His family had quite a bit of money and helped him. I had no lawyer, so the court battle always ended up with me losing, no matter how hard I fought. He ended up with my home and my children. He didn't have them for too long before he lost them to foster care, but then he got them back again. And that was a great deal to do with the Christian drug rehab that he was involved with, because every time he would come to court, he would come in with 2 pastors with him, and everyone had a Bible in their hand. And I felt like, jeepers, if I dress up like a nun, will I get my children back? I just didn't know what was going on. He had, 5 sisters that were all toting my children back and forth to school and making things look good. Well, he was still missing and using, and they were covering for him and making things look good. So he had them, and then he got his own place in the city, close to the Christian rehab, so they could keep an eye on him. And my children didn't get an education. They never went to school. He was never there. He'd go missing for days at a time. They had no food. They had no toothbrushes, no shampoo. He beat them. He tried to smother them. He molested them. I can't tell you how it hurts for a mom to hear her daughter say, Daddy made me have sex with him and it was gross and disgusting. And I couldn't save them because they wouldn't let me near my children. There was so much horror going on that my children had to endure and that were covering, that they became accustomed to lying, covering for their father and feeling bad for their father. And I had just adjusted to the fact that I was defeated. And then I got a call, here, you can have the kids. I want to go use drugs. And I'm like, wow, God, you heard me. When they came back to me, they were covered with blackheads. They didn't know how to wash their own hair. They were covered with head lice. I had to sit my 12-year-old daughters, that's my youngest, and bathe them and wash their hair and teach them how to brush their teeth and how to clean their ears and how to clean themselves. Got a place that could accommodate the kids, moved in. He went and smoked crack down in another state, got in trouble, came back, went back to the Christian drug rehab, and then decided he was coming back for the kids. My heart was so broken that these kids were being put in and ripped away and put in and ripped away, that I tried to take my own life 3 times in like 5 weeks. The third time it brought me quite a long stay. And I worked on myself, and I decided, you know what, I can live. I can do this. And I might not have my kids with me, but I'm worth something. So I did it. And then I decided, you know what, my kids will be 18 someday, and then I'll be able to see them. And they can make a choice if they want to see me, and they can come to me. And they're adult children now. I feel that they feel that is my fault, that I couldn't save them. So now they have turned the abuse on me. The last physical abuse that I just even don't know if it was one of my children or not, in 2010, where I was almost killed. A fractured skull, a fractured jaw, a broken nose, and a broken orbital socket with a partially detached retina in my left eye. My right leg was bruised from my groin down to my knee with the worst bruise I've ever seen, and it looked almost like I was hit with a board because I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I don't remember anything. I don't know who did it. I don't remember anything about that day. There was a knife at the scene, and there was a baseball bat at the scene. There were broken chairs. There was no crime scene evidence done, and the police went off what was said in the interviews. According to everybody there, no one saw me laying there bleeding out and almost dead. Nobody saw that. I will never understand how that happened. My son admits to a fight with my boyfriend, but then him and his friends supposedly left. My daughter claims she was in the basement the whole time, although she had to walk up through the kitchen and see her mother laying there, dying. She simply sat on the couch, and when the police arrived, she was just sitting there with not a tear in her eye. The police came to the door and asked if they could come in, and she said yes, and they walked into the kitchen, and they started immediately getting the EMTs, paramedics to come in and get me. I have to live with that the rest of my life. I have to be aware that it was one of the people that I love. And they are my children, and I love them, but keeping them at an arm's length, living in a secure building where they can't just come in and out, is what I found to be effective for me. I did have a home, but they would break in through windows. My children have stolen all my jewelry. They have stolen my medications. And although they're my children, it's very hard. But I had to make that choice to keep myself safe. The way I keep myself emotionally and mentally safe is to keep myself surrounded by healthcare workers, therapists, psychiatrists, DMH workers. I know that will always be a part of my life, as well as being in a domestic violence support group, which works extremely well for me. Just knowing that other women have the same situation and we can share our stories and share our strength together of how we survived. And that is basically how I survive. You don't have to live in that situation. You can get out. You certainly don't have to stay in it as long as I did. You're not the only one. And that you are worth something, that your life does matter. And even if you can't save your kids, you can always love them. You can save yourself.